a lot of the British wrestlers, I remember when I was younger, were very, very dismissive of WWF, that it was all, you know, these big muscle Marys, you know, stamping about the ring and hollering into the microphone, what's happened to the grappling? And I was watching this match, and this match is a really important match, not just for British wrestling, but for world wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was looking at this and I was thinking, if you were one of those British wrestlers from the 70s and 80s, I remember thinking, you know, pathetic, you know, if they were any good, they'd be big, wouldn't they? And they are artists. They are so fantastic. And I've got more and more excited in it because it just seems like this lost world of men who do wrestling better than anybody else has ever done wrestling before. One of those people is Marc Rollerball Rocco. So he was known as the Manchester Mean Machine. He was a fourth generation wrestler. His great grandfather had been in the sort of like travelling circus and fairs, taking on all comers. His father was a wrestler called Jim Hussey, who had once wrestled Andre the Giant when Andre was very young in France. And Rollerball Rocco we've talked before about Dynamite Kid and about how he changed the business, about how he introduced this high-flying, fast-paced, hard-hitting, very technical wrestling that really is like modern wrestling today. If you took Dynamite Kid out of 1981 and put him in 2019, 2020, he would still be in the top echelon of workers. Marc Rollerball Rocco is the guy who really invented the style that Dynamite Kid then took to the rest of the world. And Rocco is one of those guys who is just, he's very much forgotten outside of the tiny world of just British wrestling fans. And you watch this match and you realise he was just one of the thousands of competitors in Britain who had just been given this generations of technique and skill that had gone from the 20s all the way through to the 80s. And it's just that living embodiment of wrestling history. And so watching this match with him and Dynamite Kid, you can see, I mean, it's just fantastic. It's still state of the art, and it's from Christmas 1980.
Ford, boxer versus wrestler. Terrific throw forward. And the follow-up with a back elbow to the stomach. And Rocco doesn't like this treatment. He's used to dishing it out, but he doesn't like it.
The first thing you'll notice when you watch it as well is how different wrestling looked back then. How exciting. The film through a capstan cigarette fug, and you really hear the bell ding.
Yeah, you can't see any of the crowd.
No, at certain points you hear people shout out, but it's quite indistinct. At one point, I think in a different Rocco match that I was watching, you just hear someone going, "Come on, you big woman!" like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the referee's decision.
You know, the fact that on ITV you would go, we're going over now live to Catford, and you would watch two men fighting in Catford. I mean, when was the last time Catford was on telly? It's just, and the voice of Kent Walton over the top of it, which is that beautiful hello, Grapple fans, welcome. It's just lovely.
So this is going to be a humdinger, this one. Whichever way it goes, it's going to be a hard bout, that I can guarantee you. The Dynamite Kid, just back as the MC said, on a flying visit with his back to us there. 14 stone 2 now, the Dynamite Kid.
Watching this match, what you have is a young Dynamite Kid, a returning British hero who's been to Stampede in Canada for a brief period, who's been to Japan, who's getting a name, who has come back for a whistle-stop tour. I imagine he was visiting his kids for Christmas. And he takes on Rollerball Rocco. And Rocco is fire and determination and innovation, and he is full on. And we know what Dynamite Kid is like. And watching the two of them do it, it's just amazing.
I just like the fact that they're like, you see these kind of like old videos of like the big wrestlers back in the day and stuff. I've never seen anything like this so early.
No.
Like they do their move and they're back on their feet immediately, and you don't see that for the first half of the WrestleMania that we watched.
And the funny thing is, when people talk about British wrestling, what you think of is you think of Big Daddy and you think of giant haystacks. What has been really forgotten with that glib way of doing it? It's like thinking all wrestling is Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
What you're forgetting is the undercard, and the undercard were the guys who could really go. Rocco talked about Dynamite Kid. He'd say, if we went to a venue, we would turn up and we'd have our match. He said, if the next time they announced us, that venue would sell out immediately.
Yeah.
And this talent that laid underneath the two big sort of names of Haystacks and Daddy, even, you know, your Jackie Pallows and your Mick McManuses, who are the generation before, they were not the prime wrestlers. The prime wrestlers were people like Rocco, like Johnny Saint, Crybaby Jim Breaks. He was great. Not gone so well for him. He's 80 now, and he's on a murder charge in Gran Canaria.
Oh, still crying?
I think, if anything, probably a little bit more. He murdered a woman with a cup.
Wow.
I mean, it's mad.
I didn't know you do that.
But those guys are the best of the best, and they'd taken all of that lineage and going back to sort of like Cornish wrestling and you know, the Snake Pit in Wigan, and it all comes together, and they are written out of history. Rocco has an amazing career in that he goes in the early 80s to New Japan, where he becomes the opponent of Tiger Mask. He becomes Black Tiger, and he's there for a decade. Black Tiger was a gimmick that would later be given to Eddie Guerrero. But in that time, Rocco took his style to Japan, and then it obviously came back through Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid to America. You cannot underestimate how good he is. And the number of the matches that I've seen that he's in, he just has no off switch. He is 100 miles an hour all the time. When you see pictures of him, he looks incredible. You know, if you've got like Craig Fairbrass comes back to EastEnders, you know, those sorts of, and they're a bit older, and you go, he sort of looks good for an older guy. He's got a bit tanned, doesn't he? Rollerball Rocco, in 1991, his career ended when he found out he had a match with Fit Finlay in Woking, and he was in a lot of pain afterwards, had pain in his kidneys and back. He thought it was because of a pile driver he'd taken, and he went to the hospital, and they actually found an undiagnosed heart condition. And so he had to quit immediately. Right. And so he gave up and he moved to Tenerife, where he ran a car hire business. And that has obviously kept him looking great because he's been out in the sun. He looks dashing. If your mum came back in and she went, I've got bad news, Peter, I am leaving your father.
Yeah, leaving Stewie for Rollerball Rocco.
But for Mark Rollerball Rocco. She might call him Mark Hussey. I'm leaving him for Mr. Hussey. That's his real name. You would go, Mum, how can you? And he'd come in and you'd go, oh, he smells amazing. Just really, woody and leather and, super. Hey, Pete, do you want to have a little pop in the old Maserati? You've got Maserati? Mr. Hussey, you've got Maserati.
But I've got to give a little credit to Mick here, because I was a teenager and my dad had been on, and he said, come on, we'll go. And I said, no, I want to watch this match. And I stood in the chute. The chute is where you come from the dressing room to the ring. And I stood there, a little lad, you know, watching them wrestling. I'd watched it 100 times. And they had a match. Him and Jackie Pallo, Mick McMahon and Jackie Pallo. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The crowd reaction, and Bellevue was a wooden stadium. It was wooden floors. And the people were stamping their feet, and the sound crescendoed. It was amazing. And at 12 years old or 13 years old, I walked away and I had the glimmer. It put a spark in my little mind that I love that business.
But he just always seemed to be in slightly the wrong place at the wrong time. He goes to Japan, which means he really doesn't sort of have time to go to America. So he never does the American thing. He could have been brilliant in Stampede, where the Hart family ran, Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith got their breaks. He decides in British wrestling, he sees the writing is on the wall, but instead of going to America, late 80s, early 90s, he sort of goes to Wales and starts being part of Orig Williams's outlaw organisation. And it's just a sad thing. I saw him wrestle once. I saw him in the Boreham Wood venue in about 1991, so right at the end of his career, and he was astonishing. The closest I can sort of like explain to what he's like is it's a cross between Dynamite Kid and sort of, I don't know, Brock Lesnar. He was so much passion and aggression. He talks actually, there's a brilliant book by John Lister, who is a wrestling historian and a friend of the show. He talks about the first time, Rocco, first time he ever sees Dynamite Kid. And he said he was at a show and it was at Christmas time, and he looked up and he sees a Christmas tree, and there's a kid about 13 or 14 and he's poking his head through the Christmas tree. And Rocco says to him, just, you know, be careful with the tree there, lad. And Dynamite Kid, who is 13,
jumps on his neck and breaks it like he did with Kurt Hennig that
time. He leans out and he goes, go on, fuck off. To a wrestler. Amazing stuff. So the two men did have a rivalry, and they had a rivalry because I think they both realised how good the other was. Right. You know, they could really see, and when they get in there together, there's a bit that he does which I've never seen anyone else do, and I've only seen him do, and it's a great little wrestling trick, which is they have a break, and as he walks past Dynamite Kid, he just hits him with a knee, like a swan. wipe, and it's so shitty, and it's so amazing because you just go, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
You don't look like it, but you're the bad guy. There's so many bits in this match that it's really odd that Dynamite Kid is not the one who you're watching when you watch it.
Yeah.
You just watch Rollerball. He is amazing.
Very stiff. Not like as in bad, but just very stiff, violent moves in this one. And the ring does not look like it gives anything.
Well, I mean, the very fact that the referee, who is getting on a bit, will not go on the floor. He will not jump down on the floor with his knees. He just stands there and goes, 1, 2. He's really lazy. But I mean, the moves they do, I think they start off with a sort of like hammerlock, an armbar, and it's just, they look really painful and horrible.
Yeah.
By the time they're doing backdrops, which are moves that you see in every match, you know, it does a backdrop and it just leads to something else. When they do a backdrop in this, it's like, it reminds you, you're doing basically, you're falling 6.5 feet onto your back.
Yeah.
And everything about every single move in here. William Regal talks about this, and he's always said, study the great guys like Marty Jones, like Fit Finlay, and, you know, like Rollerball Rocco, which is every move has to mean something. If you do a move, you have to sort of respect the move, the integrity of the move. If you're going to take a move, then make it count. If you're going to give a move, then make it count. And these guys, everything they do, there is no, there's absolutely no breathing. There's no downtime, but there is no wasted motion. It's just a clinic. The fact that this sort of, I keep hitting my mic because I'm getting really emphatic about it. The fact that like the WWF comes along and we had this stuff. This is a decade before the WWF comes along with Hulk Hogan and, you know, Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, if you were Mark Rollerball Rocco, you'd go, a decade ago, I reinvented this business.
Yeah.
Now look at the Ultimate Warrior and he's dragging it back to fucking Stone Age. And I always think with someone like Rollerball Rocco, he's still alive. He looks really healthy. You see him at wrestlers' reunions every now and then. He'll give an interview here and there. He's very humble. And I think, you know, he just seems like a really nice guy. I just want him to get the credit he's due, because he will, you know, eventually, like Dynamite Kid did last year, Mark Rocco, because he's human and made of carbon and atoms, he will eventually one day no longer be here. Yeah. He will die. And then everyone will turn around and go, he really was one of the greats. So this is my basic thing that I want to do, is to just say, can everyone start doing nothing but watching Rollerball Rocco? And if you do anything where someone says, do you watch wrestling? Don't say, yes, I do, or say, yes, I quite like WWE, or say, yeah, I'm really into, just say, Rollerball Rocco! Every answer has to be Rollerball Rocco. Because you just have to see Rollerball Rocco for 5 minutes, and then you are Rollerball Rocco for life.
Oh, Mark.
Did you like Rollerball Rocco?
I did enjoy Rollerball.
I really thought you were going to say no.
No, I'm more of a Dynamite Kid guy. I did go around and watch a few of their other matches and stuff, and watched, again, I watched Kurt Hennig get his neck broken by Dynamite Kid. It was horrible.
Oh, yeah.
oh, dearie me. But no.
Yeah. One very, very last thing is a little mention of Mark Rocco and the WWF in Bret Hitman Hart's book, Hitman, My Real Life in the Cartoon World of Pro Wrestling. And I think it's one of the saddest stories in the history of wrestling.
Right.
So he says, the WWF was just beginning to get over big in the UK. I couldn't help but see a glimpse of the future in the past when Rollerball Rocco and a bunch of the English boys dropped their bags into the dressing room. Pat Patterson had hired them to work the opening dark match. Rollerball's Black Tiger gimmick had long since died in Japan, and now he and the other lads toiled endlessly for a few quid, crisscrossing the UK riding 4 to a car. In the WWF dressing room, they wore envious expressions that reminded me of pack horses who suddenly found themselves corralled with groomed Clydesdales. Roller's face lit up when Hulk Hogan came into the dressing room. They'd been good buddies in Japan, and Roller had no doubt bragged to everybody that he and Hulk were friends. But that was millions of dollars ago. Sadly, Hulk barely remembered him. The dejection on Roller's face was pitiful. And I look at that and I just go, the reality is, you know, you meet the best wrestler in the world and you don't have the fucking balls, Hulk Hogan, to remember who he is. Yes, I switched it. You thought I was talking about Hulk Hogan.
No, I never did.
Oh, I should have set it out better. That's exactly the sort of thing that I need. I need lessons from Rollerball Rocco on how to make everything in my life better.
Switcheroo.
Yeah, but I hope to see his legacy cemented as just one of the greatest British wrestlers of all time. And actually, no, I mean, fuck that, because that's the problem with this. He's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. The British scene, if you're not into it, it's the most rewarding thing you can ever watch. I know Japan is great fun, and I know like the territories and the 70s and 80s are brilliant, but if you're British and you're not constantly watching British wrestling and trying to work out its history, then you are a traitor.